Global debt just crossed $300 trillion. Let that number sit for a moment. 300 trillion across every major economy on Earth. The United States, China, Japan, Germany, France, every significant country carrying enormous sovereign debt. Now, here's the question almost no one asks. If every major country is in debt, who is the creditor? The United States owes trillions. China owes trillions. Japan's debt is nearly 2.5 times its entire economy. If they all owe money, who are they paying? Where does the money go? Pause on that. Because the answer doesn't point to a villain. It points to something more interesting, something structural. Maybe the problem isn't that countries are broke. Maybe the system requires them to be. We start with a belief most people hold without questioning it. Governments should manage money the way a responsible family does. Spend less than you earn. Pay down debt. Save for the future. Don't live beyond your means. It sounds reasonable. It sounds obvious. It is also the wrong model. Here is why. A household uses money. A household earns income, spends from that income, and borrows when it needs more than it has. If a family runs out of money, the situation is genuinely dangerous. A sovereign government with its own currency does something different. It doesn't just use money. In a very real sense, it is the origin of the money. When a government spends, it pushes money into the economy. When it taxes, it pulls money back out. The deficit, the gap between what it spends and what it collects, is the net injection into the private sector. Follow that logic carefully. A government deficit is not a hole in the economy. It is an addition to someone else's balance sheet. Every dollar the government owes is a dollar someone else holds. A pension fund, a foreign central bank, an individual investor, a financial institution. A country's debt is someone else's asset, which means if that debt vanished, so would the asset. Sovereign bonds sit inside pension portfolios, central bank reserves, and money market funds. They are not abstract obligations floating in political space. They are the collateral underpinning vast portions of the global financial system. Remove the debt, and you remove the foundation beneath it. The household metaphor doesn't just simplify, it inverts the reality. So if governments are constantly running deficits, how does the debt not spiral immediately out of control? The mechanism is worth understanding precisely. When a government needs to finance a deficit, it issues bonds, treasury bonds, gilts, government securities. Investors, individuals, institutions, central banks purchase those bonds. They hand over money now in exchange for a promise of repayment later, plus interest. When those bonds mature, the government pays them back. But here is what rarely gets explained. Governments almost never pay off debt permanently. When old bonds mature, they issue new bonds. The debt gets rolled over, replaced, refinanced. The total balance doesn't disappear. It persists and it is managed. This is not a cover-up. It is standard sovereign financial practice across every major economy. The United States has been rolling over debt continuously for most of its history. Japan, the United Kingdom, every major economy operates this way. It works because the system doesn't require full repayment. It requires confidence. It requires growth. As long as the economy expands and the government can service its obligations, pay the interest, roll the principal, the system remains stable. Debt is not a bomb with a fuse. It is a structure under maintenance. Then why does the debt keep growing? Across every decade, across different governments, across different political philosophies, the trend is almost always the same. Up. This is not an accident. It is a feature of the architecture. Consider what a modern government is actually committed to. When the economy contracts, in a recession, a financial crisis, a pandemic, governments intervene. They deploy stimulus. They extend unemployment support. They bail out systemic institutions. Because the alternative is a collapse that costs far more. This is structural. Populations age. Older populations consume more healthcare. They draw on pension systems. These are long-term obligations built into the design of modern states. They don't go away, they grow. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, power grids, digital networks, requires capital today for returns that span decades. Governments borrow long because the assets last long. And then there is the compounding effect of interest itself. Debt accumulates interest. That interest adds to the debt, which generates more interest. In periods of high rates, this dynamic accelerates. None of this is recklessness. None of this is incompetence. It is what happens when you build a society inside a growth-based monetary system. The system is calibrated to expand. Credit expands, investment expands, GDP expands, and government obligations expand alongside it. In a system built on expanding credit, shrinking debt is contraction. Think about what it would take to actually reduce sovereign debt significantly. Governments would need to run surpluses, collecting more than they spend, for years, possibly decades. That means cutting services, raising taxes, or both. It means withdrawing money from the economy, slowing growth, reducing the very activity that makes the debt serviceable. In most political economies, sustained austerity at that scale is not just difficult, it is self-defeating. Now we need to go one layer deeper. Because the debt you see on the official ledger, the number on the debt clock, is only part of the picture. Most advanced economies carry a second category of obligations: unfunded or underfunded commitments, future pension payouts, long-term healthcare costs, social insurance promises made to citizens who have not yet claimed them. These are not always counted as formal debt. They are promises, legal and political commitments to future spending that depend on future economic production to be honored. The scale is significant. Some estimates put the unfunded obligations of the United States alone in the tens of trillions beyond the official debt figure. Other nations face similar structural gaps. This is not deception in the conventional sense. The promises were made in good faith in periods of growth by governments that expected the economy to keep expanding. But the effect is real. The future has already been pre-spent, not stolen, not hidden, pre-committed. Future generations will produce wealth that has already been claimed by pensions being calculated today, by healthcare systems already in motion, by infrastructure already aging and already in need of replacement. That is an uncomfortable structural reality, and it exists independently of which party is in power. Given all of this, given rising debt, unfunded commitments, and the structural compulsion to expand, what are the actual options? There are three. Only three. The first is growth. If the economy expands fast enough, if productivity rises, if innovation creates new sectors, if the tax base grows, debt becomes manageable relative to GDP. The ratio improves even if the absolute number stays large. This is the preferred path. It is also increasingly difficult to sustain as economies mature. The second is default. A government formally refuses to honor its obligations. This is catastrophic. It destroys institutional credibility, collapses access to credit markets, and triggers cascading economic damage. It happens, Argentina, Greece in modified form. But for major reserve currency economies, it is essentially a last resort that restructures the entire global financial order. The third is devaluation, inflation. A government doesn't default on its obligations. It pays them in currency that is worth less than it was when the promise was made. The real burden of the debt shrinks. Creditors receive what they were promised in nominal terms, but less in real terms. This is the silent adjustment, the one that happens without a formal announcement, the one we explored in the first video, the invisible mechanism that redistributes purchasing power across the economy. None of these options is clean, none is painless. Growth requires conditions that cannot be legislated into existence. Default transfers the damage to creditors and destabilizes the broader system. Devaluation transfers it to anyone holding cash or fixed income. The system is not moving toward a solution. It is managing competing pressures, shifting the weight, not removing it. Now, connect everything. Ask the question at the foundation. Where does money come from? In the modern system, money is primarily created through credit. Banks extend loans. Those loans become deposits. New money enters circulation. At the sovereign level, the same logic applies. When a government issues bonds and those bonds are purchased, particularly when purchased by a central bank, money is effectively created. Government debt is not just a record of borrowing. It is one of the primary mechanisms through which money enters the monetary system. Here's what that means. If money is created through debt, and governments are the largest issuers of debt, then sovereign debt is not a drag on the monetary system. It is foundational to it. A world with zero sovereign debt would not be a world of financial health. It would be a world with dramatically less money in circulation, less liquidity, less credit, smaller economies. The very instrument we treat as a symptom of failure is, structurally, one of the pillars of economic function. So, why is every country broke? They are not, in any meaningful sense. They are operating inside a credit-based architecture where debt is not the opposite of money. It is the mechanism of money, where sovereign obligations are not signs of weakness, but load-bearing elements of the financial system, where the accumulation of debt is not a political failure, but a structural consequence of how modern economies are built and maintained. The national debt is not a countdown to collapse. It is a record of borrowed future growth. And in a credit-based system, that record is not a warning. It is inevitable,